He said, mafia guys like to brag and throw names out. He said, I never saw any evidence that Mario Cuomo was with us.
Yeah.
Us meaning, the mob. And I mentioned a few other people. And then I said, Al Sharpton. And Francis, this is in my article in Vanity Fair, which the article's called something like the Yuppie Don or something like that. He said, Sharpton, he said, that guy was all over me wanting to get a piece of the Michael Jackson tour.
All right, ladies and gents, gather round. We got value going once, truth going twice, sold for a song. That's right, folks. Rights signed away, data given away, pennies on the play. Publishing, gone. Credit, missing. Ownership, kiss it goodbye. 50 pages of catch-22s, no dice. You can't eat a like, a follow, or a view. Sold for a song. But wait now, hold your bits, hold your breath. Here comes the truth louder than the bass line. Time to take it back, where the artists rise, the system shakes, and the silence finally breaks.
Welcome to Sold for a Song, the transformative podcast that dissects the music industry's long-standing practice of undervaluing its most essential contributors. Yes, we're talking songwriters and artists. In each episode, we'll delve into the journey of recognizing and elevating the true worth and value of music creators, discover how the industry has exploited creators, and learn actionable strategies to revolutionize this trend and take control of your career. Hello, podcast land. I'm Terrence Sawchuk, but you can call me Terry. After 30 plus years in the trenches of the music industry, trust me, I've seen it all. The highs, the heartbreaks, and the resilience it takes to succeed as a creator. Here's what I've learned. Awakening your self-worth, owning and leveraging your value, and streamlining the process to free up the time we need to do what we most love to do, which is create. That's what stands between you and the freedom we're all chasing. All right, before we dive in, if you believe in empowering artists and redefining what it means to thrive creatively, do me a favor, subscribe, leave a quick review, and share this episode with someone who truly needs it. That one click helps more than you know. And if you want to go deeper, join me at terrencesawchuk.com to be a part of the community and follow all of my endeavors for exclusive content and updates. If you would have told me in 1990 that one day I would be sitting down having a candid conversation with Fredric Dannen, the author of The Hitmen, I would have said you are clearly crazy. Fredric cut his teeth writing for The New Yorker and Vanity Fair, and some of his articles actually helped free wrongly accused people of crimes, including uncovering lost evidence in the case of Calvin Washington, a Texan wrongly convicted of homicide. As a direct result of Dannen's efforts, Calvin Washington won a full pardon for his innocence, and he was also on death row. But it was in 1990 that the music industry would never be the same again due to his book, The Hitmen. It spent a month on the New York Times bestseller list. Billboard awarded it the #2 greatest music industry book of all time. The Hitmen is easily the Bible for the music industry, especially when it comes to the world of Payola, the involvement of the mafia, the corruption and bad deals from record labels, etc., etc. Nobody to this day has pulled back the curtain on the corruption in the music industry like Fredric Dannen. That's why he is the perfect guest for Sold for a Song. You played a pivotal role in my music career because I came from a very small town of 5,500 people in Northern Ontario, Canada, and then went to Toronto to pursue my dreams in a recording school by the name of the Harris Institute of the Arts. And John Harris, who started that school, was smart enough to say, everyone needs to read this book. So this is 1989 and 90 that I went to school, and that's the year the book was published, right?
Yes, 90, summer of 90. It was held up for 3 months because Clive Davis was threatening to sue us.
Of course.
And the delay resulted in the book selling better because it came out at a better time. And that was thanks to Clive. I could tell you that story, actually. It's quite funny.
Absolutely. Well, I'm going to just let you take the floor and just tell us your whole story, how you got into it, the whole thing. But I just wanted to personally thank you for giving me a snorkel to jump into the waters with the sharks in my first year in the music business. So it gave me some insight into what was coming. So I really appreciate it. And this is a real honor for me to be able to interview you here literally decades later. So thank you.
Well, thank you. The way this came about, I was at McGraw-Hill as a staff writer for Chemical Week magazine and writing about the chemical industry, Monsanto, Dow, Union Carbide. It was like the business week for that business. And my editor, Claudia Deutsch, became an editor for the New York Times Sunday business page. And she asked if I would do a freelance piece for her. This was mid-1980s. And I said, sure, but not about the chemical business. Let it be something else. And she said, well, what? And I don't know exactly why, except, I have training as a musician, a classical pianist. And I said, the music industry. She said, great. So I ended up doing this story on PolyGram Records. And in the middle of the reporting, Gunter Hensler, who had been president of PolyGram, was let go and replaced with Dick Asher, who is the protagonist of my book, ultimately. And in the course of preparing for the interview with Asher, somebody said to me, ask Dick Asher about independent promotion. Well, I didn't know what that was at that time. But when I asked him, I noticed that he blanched. I mean, the question took him aback, so I knew there was something there.
The plot thickens.
And he gave a rather hestant answer, but my time with him was limited, so I didn't pursue it then and there. But after the article came out, it was published on the front page of the Times Business section. He called me and he said, let's have lunch. So he took me to a Japanese restaurant and he said, now that your article's published, I want to give you a truthful answer to your question. And it was at that lunch that he told me the Pink Floyd story that opens my book. For your listeners who don't know, Pink Floyd's The Wall was one of the few really successful albums of 1979. I think that and Michael Jackson's Off the Wall, and everything else was tanking because they were largely disco albums. And the disco bubble had burst, and the whole industry was losing money. But The Wall, which is a double album, was selling very well, and without any hit singles needed, because Pink Floyd was one of those rare groups that didn't need top 40 radio at that time to sell records. So they were touring with The Wall, and they were playing in only 4 cities because it was a very elaborate tour. And the first city was Los Angeles. And so Asher, who had just come in from London to become deputy president under President Walter Yetnikov, was looking at the balance sheet, and he saw that we're spending millions of dollars on these independent record promoters. Why are they necessary? When Dick went off to London a few years earlier, they didn't exist. I mean, they did, but they were not expensive like that, and they were different people. So he said, look, I'm going to prove that we don't need them. And there's a track from the Wall album called Another Brick in the Wall Part 2, and I'm not going to pay any independent promoter for any airplay for that single in Los Angeles. Well, there's Pink Floyd touring in LA. Everyone under 30 seems to have a Pink Floyd t-shirt. They're filling up the sports arena, all sold out shows. This is, tens of thousands of people. And not one top 40 station in LA will play Another Brick in the Wall Part 2. It's being played everywhere else in the country. And that's how my book opens. And that's the story that Asher told me at lunch. And I left that restaurant with one thought in my head. I'm going to quit my job and write a book on this subject. And I did that.
Wasn't it right after they left the city of Los Angeles, they started putting money into independent promotion? They started playing on the radio once they left the city? I think that was from the book.
Yeah, Asher's experiment acquired part 2, which was, okay, I'm lifting the ban. And within hours, the stations were playing Another Brick in the Wall. I'll tell you another funny story, though. One of the stations that I cited was KFI. It ceased being a top 40 station not long after that, partly because of these kinds of problems, and it became a talk radio. And the program director had been John Rook, and I had mentioned by name John Rook and that he'd had a close relationship with Joe Isgro, who was one of these independent promoters, one with demonstrated ties to the Gambino crime family. And I can say that without any fear of libel or slander, because it's an established fact, and he did do prison time. So while I was touring with the paperback of Hitmen, I was on KFI doing a live interview. No. Well, 2 people called in, John Rook and Joe Isgro.
Come on.
And I sparred with them both online. It was quite funny.
Way.
I have a recording of it. That was the most fun that I ever had on a book tour.
Oh, my God. I mean, that was the lesson I learned during our chat offline when I was like, weren't you worried about these people suing you and coming after you? It's like, well, I wasn't saying anything that wasn't public knowledge, so there was nothing to go on. And just that fearlessness and knowing, doing your due diligence and knowing your career. And just very few people have the guts to even go in and do that. It could end your career, and you just plowed through like nobody's business.
It was a different time, but I will tell you that Leslie Olsner, whom I respect greatly, she was the head of legal at Random House. And we had some very intense sessions over my book because Clive Davis was threatening to sue. And he was being represented by Bob Morvillo, who was a terrific lawyer who had represented Clive in his own criminal case years earlier, and later was the lawyer for Martha Stewart. And I like Bob very much. And I think he was embarrassed to take on this suit. But Clive had gotten a copy of the book manuscript before publication, as had some other people, depicted in the book. That's a whole other story. And we got a letter from Morvillo threatening us. And so I went over these passages with Leslie Olsner. And at first, she was skeptical. She thought there must be something wrong here. And she would say, what's your documentation for this, for this, for this? And we got to one place where Morvillo said, representing Clive, that the story about his first meeting with Bob Dylan was false and defamatory. It was a story in which, Dylan was being told by Clive that he wasn't going to be allowed to sing Talking John Birch Society Blues on the Ed Sullivan Show, which was also CBS, at that time. And he said, this is bullshit, and stalked out of the office. So that was in my book. So Leslie said, what's your source on that? I said, Leslie, my source is Clive's autobiography. And I showed her the page. And from that moment, her whole demeanor changed. She looked at me and said, so this guy's a nutcase. I said, yeah.
Oh, my God.
So in the end, and this is absolutely a fact, after months of this wrangling, I made one change, and it was Clive Davis's age when he joined the law firm that he was at before he joined CBS Records, Colin something. I don't remember the law firm's name now. I misstated his age by 1 year, and that was the only change I made after all this.
Oh, my God.
And yes, and because of that, of the delay, two things happened. One is the book came out and Walter Yetnikov was fired almost immediately after. And Newsweek or Time, I think it was Newsweek, did a story crediting my book with his downfall. In fact, that wasn't the reason. It was because of John Landau and Bruce Springsteen that they had made a public statement that they no longer had a good relationship with Yetnikov. And this was something that John did on his own. I have tremendous respect for John Landau. But I got the credit for it. And then at the same time, I was on Joan Rivers' program promoting the book. And it was during Operation Desert Storm, or the operation in Iraq under George H.W. Bush. And her show was shown in some places and preempted in others, so they ran it twice. It was very fortunate timing. So I got those two tremendous boosts. And the next phone call I got was from the publicity head at Random House saying, your book's going to be on the New York Times bestseller list next week. Yeah. Thank you, Clive.
Thank you, Clive. Oh, my God. Yeah. First of all, I want our listeners to go out and get this book, The Hitmen. If you're in the music industry, it will change your life. I mean, it's still very pertinent today because, you've got streaming. I don't want to get it off track too much right now, but with streaming, there's arguably a payola in there as well. But
don't worry about that. Maybe
give our listeners a little bit more of a window into what exactly the network was. You've got Morris Levy, who's attached to the mob. Like, what was that whole culture that nobody knew was going on, including artists or fans or anything at that time?
Well, let's give a little historic perspective first. In the early 1960s, the Attorney General's office, the Manhattan Attorney General's office, brought a case against radio station disc jockeys and some other record executives on the issue of payola. And there were congressional hearings on that subject. Dick Clark testified, Alan Freed testified, Joe Smith, the future head of Elektra Records, testified. And as a result of this, Alan Freed's career was destroyed. But payola in that time was very penny ante thing. It was, what they called the $50 handshake. Right. You'd go up to a disc jockey and you'd just bribe him play your record. Later on, they changed the system so that the disc jockeys didn't select the records. It was program directors. So those were the people you had to corrupt. But during the disco era, we're talking about, mid-70s, 76, 77, the whole nature of the industry started to change. The focus on A&R, artisan repertoire, finding and developing talent was becoming less important than promotion. Because frankly, in the disco era, there was a heady period where you could literally take Beethoven's Fifth Symphony and make a disco hit out of it, as was done in the soundtrack of Saturday Night Fever. They thought...
Didn't the Stones have a disco record on the shelf?
No, I wasn't the Stones. I mean, quite frankly, the influence of disco, even that record I referred to earlier, Another Brick in the Wall Part 2, is a quasi-disco song. It's just better in so many ways than most of the disco songs, although there was some very, very good music came from that period. The Bee Gees and Donna Summer, for example. George McRae's Rock Your Baby, I think, is an excellent record. Yeah. But anyway, so with this push on promotion, the focus became, how do we get our songs played on radio? Well, around that time, a group of independent promoters who called themselves The Network, some of them, not all, but some of them with established mafia ties, suddenly appeared and kind of took over that whole business of getting airplay on top 40 stations, to the point where Asher got this lesson from his Another Brick in the Wall experiment. The power that they had wasn't so much that they could get a record played, although they generally could. Their power was that they could prevent a record from being played. So it became kind of an extortion scheme. And it was something the industry created out of its own greed. So by the late 70s, the record companies were paying tens of millions of dollars at a time when profits were plummeting because the music wasn't very good and they were laying off people. But at the same time, they had this huge line item for independent promotion. And Asher noted that there was this sort of consciousness of guilt on the part of CBS Records, later Sony Records. And this is a company that's publicly traded on the New York Stock Exchange. But the receipts for these independent promoters were written on these sort of tear-off stubs that got thrown out. So they weren't even leaving a paper trail. All of this was very shocking to Asher. And the narrative drive of my book was about his crusade, a very lonely crusade, to rid the industry of this cancer that it had brought upon itself.
Incredible. The story that echoes in my mind is the story of how they kind of used Loverboy as an example as well.
Loverboy was one example. That was one record that they kept off the air because it wasn't paid for. Another was The Who's single, You Better You Bet, was another example of a record that did not get airplay because the proper people weren't paid. I mean, if you could do that to The Who, right? And Pink Floyd, well, you don't get much bigger than that, do you?
Speaks mafia to me when somebody could get that deep.
Well, the thing is, it's the carrot and stick. The thing is that if the program director couldn't be bribed, there could be other consequences. I mean, there were genuine threats. There are documented cases of violence in my book.
Explain the relationship and the power and lack of power, I guess, between what were the original independent record labels that were discovering all this amazing talent and then what became these behemoth major labels. Do you have anything to say about that?
Yes. Well, the thing is that the pioneers in the record business, people like labels like Sun Records and Morris Levy, of course, who founded Roulette Records and the jazz club Birdland. Morris was a fascinating figure because he'd been practically raised by the Genovese crime family and was ultimately brought down because of his association with the Genovese family. Actually, I don't know if you'll have time for this.
I have all the time in the world.
All right. I can tell you a very funny Morris Levy story. It's going to sound like I'm digressing, but I must tell you this. One of my favorite comedy routines ever was Mel Brooks and Carl Reiner's The 2,000-Year-Old Man. I don't know if you ever heard that, but the whole idea is that Brooks, there were two hit records and it was all improvised. And Brooks is playing a man who's lived for 2,000 years and Reiner's interviewing him. And at one point he says, "Did you know Joan of Arc?" He said, "I went with her, And Reiner says, how did you feel about her being burned at the stake? And Brooks says, terrible. And I always, I used to teach a course in interviewing, for journalists. And I always say, never ask the how did it feel question. And I give this as an example. I said, it's the worst question you could ask, right? So I attended Morris Levy's trial in Camden, New Jersey, and he had his office on Broadway. The Office of Roulette Records was being wiretapped by the FBI. They had planted cameras and microphones. They'd gotten what's called a Title III. In other words, they gotten a federal judge to give them permission because they had probable cause. And sure enough, he had like a mob summit meeting in his office. And they were members of the Genovese crime family. And they were talking about a deal with Cutout Records. And I don't want to get into the details, but it was a profit-making deal for the mafia. And the recordings really caught him dead to rights. So they used these transcripts in court, and Levy was convicted and sentenced to 10 years. He never did a day of that because he died of cancer, Alav Sholem. And I went up to his farm in upstate New York in Ghent, and I sat at the table with him. And of course, he was despondent. And I thought maybe finally now I can get him to admit something. And I said, I brought up the name Tommy Eberle, who was a crime boss that Levy had owned a Cutout record label with. I think it was called Promo Records. Don't quote me on the name. I'm not sure about the name. I have to look that up. But at any rate, they had a business together. And I said to Morris, you had this business with Tommy Eberle. And Morris, who had this gravelly voice, it sounded like Big Julie from Guys and Dolls. And he had big hands like catcher's mitts. He was definitely the biggest Jew that I've ever met. And he said, so we wanted to do something legit, I said, I was pursuing this line of questioning. And finally, in exasperation, I said, well, how did you feel about him being gunned down gangland style in Crown Heights? And Morris Levy said, terrible.
That's going to be my go-to answer now. Oh my God.
So anyway, yes, that was Morris. I'm still very friendly with his son Adam, who I like a lot. Adam is not like his father, except he's smart. Morris Levy was very, very smart, but Adam's a really good guy. But Morris really fascinated me, and Roulette was the only independent label that survived. All the other ones were absorbed because the big labels, Capitol, RCA, Columbia, they were very late coming into rock and roll. The head of A&R for Columbia under Goddard Lieberson was Mitch Miller. People who are old enough may remember Sing Along with Mitch. He had this TV show. You're too young for this. But he had been a classical oboist, very talented musician. His taste was Tony Bennett, Rosemary Clooney. He signed some who are great. He signed great acts, but he would have passed on the Beatles, I'm sure. He did. Actually, he wasn't one of the ones that was given an opportunity to sign them, so we can't say this for sure. But he didn't like rock and roll. John Hammond, who was at CBS Records, was the one who brought in Springsteen and Dylan. And Dylan was called Hammond's Folly. And it wasn't until Clive came in that the label really changed course. And he's given due credit for that in my book. I give Clive credit where he deserved credit.
He loves giving himself credit.
But that man's ego was out of control. Well, his own secretary said that he thought they named the CD after
that's right.
him.
Oh, my God. He put out his own documentary recently, too, just to cement what he wanted his name to be in history. And, oh, my God.
And the thing is that the other thing about the network, just another reason that the independent labels didn't survive, is that they couldn't compete for airplay. That was really the whole purpose of the network. It was to give the major labels who had bigger budgets the opportunity to control radio. So that's how they ended up acquiring a lot of these independent labels that would have preferred to stay independent.
That still goes on today. So if I'll just mention Virgil Simpson, who sat outside of the, I remember him winning a Grammy for Best Country Album. And I said, you watch, I bet you they don't play one of his songs in the United States this week, let alone ever. And no, they didn't. And then the following year at the CMAs, he was busking outside of the arena in Nashville while the CMA Awards were going on inside with his Grammy sitting on a bucket as the winner for the greatest country record. And he's not even invited. or played on the radio. So for people who think this stuff is not still going on, there you go.
Oh, the other great highlight of my book tour was I was one of the 2 keynote speakers at CMA the year after the book came out. I was the first speaker, and the second one was Queen Latifah. So I got to say, hey, I opened for Queen Latifah. She was hilarious. I loved hearing her.
I mean, the book opens up beautifully to, the first third of it, I'll say it's just a story of characters. And, you touched on Dick Asher and Morris Levy and a few, and Clive, obviously. But, I mean, it really is it was a character era. And the stories are hilarious, from Walter Yetnikoff to David Geffen, Irving Azoff, and
well, some of those personalities are still around. I mean, Geffen, he's not active, but he's still very much in the news. And it wasn't that long ago that he was in partnership with Spielberg and Katzenberg and was making movies. And Clive, it wasn't that long ago that he put on that big concert in Central Park. So he's still breathing. Walter has departed. I wrote an in memoriam on Walter for Billboard that probably would have surprised him had his spirit come back and read it, because it was rather affectionate. Walter didn't like me very much, but I never disliked Walter.
No, well, when you bring out the truth sometimes, I mean, I don't think it's as much like that now, but then it was definitely a cast of characters. They really did want the success of things tied to their name. It was that era of just kind of the boys club in New York City and LA. Just so many amazing stories.
I have another story to tell you.
Please.
I have to tell you this story. It's probably one of my favorite stories that's not in the book. The hardcover edition comes out. It's a bestseller. And there was an entire chapter on Alan Grubman, formerly known as Alan Grubman, until he made his first million, then he became Grubman. And he was the most powerful, successful lawyer in the business. He represented, his roster was tremendous, included Springsteen and Madonna and Billy Joel and, on and on and on. And John Branca was a Los Angeles-based lawyer. He had some great clients like Metallica, but his tentpole client was Michael Jackson. That was one client that Grubman didn't have and Branca did have. And I had a whole chapter on Grubman, and it was not very flattering. And in fact, Grubman was one of the people who got the manuscript of the book. But unlike Clive and Geffen, who threatened to sue me, Grubman would never take that approach. He called me on the phone and said, can you come in and can we talk about this? And I said, all right. I said, but you're not supposed to have this manuscript, and I'm not going to change anything just because you don't like it. So we sat there, and he said, you have this story here that one time Walter Yetnikoff screamed at me and I had to take 3 Valium. And I said, what? You're saying that's not true? He said, no, it's true. He said, but I wish you'd add that I had to take 3 Valium when I read your book, So it was things like that. But because of the way he handled it, which impressed me, I did actually take out one thing that I didn't need. And as he was talking about it, I was saying, yeah, it's kind of a low blow and it doesn't do anything for the book. And I said, you know what, Alan, I'm going to take that out. That was a voluntary concession. I had something similar with Frank DiLeo. He was Michael Jackson's manager. I had a story in my book about how he started out as a bookie. And when he was nabbed and arrested, they caught him with bets on rice paper. And that's paper that dissolves in water. That's how you destroy the evidence. So that was a pretty cool story. And I had the police reports to back that up. So when I was on my book tour, I was often asked about Jackson, and DiLeo at that point, I think it was by then, had been in the movie Goodfellas, and he was very good in that. And I told this story, and DiLeo called me one day and he said, I don't really need my kids to hear this. Would you please not keep telling that story in your radio and TV interviews? And I said, okay. Again, because he came at me like a gentleman, whereas Clive and Geffen would never come at you like a gentleman, because they're not gentlemen. They're bullies. And the thing is that, getting back to Branca, I'd had like 1 or 2 pages on Branca, and they were not too flattering either. So my phone rings, and it's Branca. I'm living in Tribeca at that time in Lower Manhattan. And he said, I'm at the Essex House on Central Park South. I'm in the suite, of course. Could you come see me? I say, I'll be there in an hour. So I got a cab. I went there. I go up, take the elevator up to the penthouse, and I'm sitting with Branca. And Branca said, Fred, your book's coming out in paperback, right? I said, yeah, pretty soon. He said, well, I got to tell you, your book caused me some problems. And I said, well, I'm not surprised. He said, no, you don't understand. He said, I had clients like Metallica calling me saying, what's the matter with you, Branca? Grubman got an entire chapter and you only got 2 pages. This is a true story. Terry, this is a true story. And I'm looking at him incredulously. And I said, what are you saying? You want more abuse? He said, could you?
A little thicker, please. Come on.
I mean, there's no bad publicity in this business.
Oh my God.
That's a true story.
God, that's insane. There was an interesting period in the book I'd love to just have you comment on. It was about the kind of what was pop music and what was recognized as sort of black race records. And I think you said it was Jerry Wexler coined the phrase rhythm and blues, which sort of gave it a different genre. And they didn't really call something pop until it left the R&B or race record space.
I love talking about this topic, and I'm so glad you asked this question, because the record business, for all its pretensions of being progressive, was in fact using the term race records and then later rhythm and blues simply on the basis of the skin color of the performers. And you can look this up, but this is a fact. I've mentioned in 1979, there were only 2 really big selling out. Well, not only 2, but there were 2 tremendous hit records at a time of real drought for the industry. One of them was Pink Floyd's The Wall, and the other was Michael Jackson's album Off the Wall. Well, guess what category that album was nominated for? Rhythm and blues, because Michael Jackson was black. And if that isn't a pop record, I don't know what is. I mean, Don't Stop Till You Get Enough. That's a black sounding record.
Apparently, it has the word wall in your album too that year.
Yeah, I know. I thought about that too. I thought about that also, right? But the thing is that, Jackson got a lot of criticism for altering his appearance, shall we say. And, I've never participated in that debate. But there's this movie, Three Kings, that I think Spike Jonze directed. There's a scene in it where one of the U.S. soldiers in Iraq who's been captured is being interrogated, and he's being asked about Michael Jackson. Like, why did he have to change his skin color? And I thought this was absolutely spot on. I mean, they really hit on something here. So yes, even the designation rhythm and blues, though it's better than race records, obviously, was still being applied strictly on the basis of race.
Speaking of Michael Jackson, so there was the whole Thriller chapter and the experience of trying to promote that record. If you could please comment on that,
Yes.
and if you could top it off with a cherry with Mr. Al Sharpton, I would love you forever.
Oh boy. Okay.
The floor is yours.
Wow. Okay. Well, I've published what I'm going to say about Al Sharpton, so it's a matter of public record. But anyway, the Thriller album, as I mentioned, Michael hired as his manager someone who'd been a promotion executive at CBS Records. At the time, Dick Asher was there, Frank DiLeo, since deceased. I'm sorry to say. I liked Frank. But Frank was an unusual choice for a manager, but he was very, very good at airplay. I forget how many of the tracks there were on Thriller, but I think maybe all but 2 of them were in the top 10. Some of them at the same time. I mean, DiLeo was really, in a big way, responsible for that. But he was very close with Joe Isgro, one of the independent record promoters. That was established at one time, had a business deal together. I wrote about this in Hitmen. So I'd like to take a moment to expound a little more broadly on this area about what do the artists think about independent promotion. And there's an anecdote in my book that I think gives you the answer to that question. The leader of the group Earth, Wind and Fire.
Maurice White, Philip Bailey.
Maurice White. There's a chapter ending in my book that was confirmed by multiple sources, including White himself. But Maurice White is in Dick Asher's office at Black Rock, which was the CBS building. And he hears that Asher is trying to start this crusade against using these mafia-connected independent promoters to get airplay. And Maurice White is saying, I have to have this. And Asher says, Maurice, you're a genius talent. Isn't it demeaning that I got to pay some guy with these kind of connections to get your record played. And White said, look, man, I only have one career. Don't make me your crusade. Now, I have a certain amount of sympathy for White's point of view, I have to say. What he's saying is, I didn't create this problem. You guys did.
Yeah.
But if someone else is using it and I'm not, I'm at an unfair disadvantage. And I can see the validity of that. But at the same time, you can imagine how despairing it must have been for Asher to hear that. I mean, Maurice White was one artist in particular that Asher revered. I'm quite sure of that the way he talked about him. Another example that Asher gave me of an artist who was all over him about, I want more independent promotion, was Bob Geldof.
Oh, wow.
You know, the force behind Live Aid, right? And someone with great moral pretensions, shall we say. So factor that in. Now, Al Sharpton. Okay. I did a profile for Vanity Fair of a former Colombo crime family capo named Michael Franzese. His father, Sonny Franzese, was a mobster's mobster. He was John Gotti on steroids. God. Really super tough guy. And Michael was not quite a chip off the old block. He was a good deal smarter, I think, certainly capable of bad behavior. He wasn't the kind of person that his father was. And he got in business with a lot of different people, some legitimate, some not. And in the course of my interviewing him, I spent 3 days with him in Beverly Hills, and he had purportedly quit the mafia, and he'd even later on published a memoir co-written called Quitting the Mob or something like that. Over the course of 3 days, I threw out some names, and I said, okay, Mario Cuomo, the former governor of New York. We hear all these stories about him. And Michael said, oh, that's just bullshit, just nonsense. He said, mafia guys like to brag and throw names out. He said, I never saw any evidence that Mario Cuomo was with us. Yeah. Us meaning, the mob. And I mentioned a few other people. And then I said, Al Sharpton. And Franzese, this is in my article in Vanity Fair, which the article's called something like the Yuppie Don or something like that. He said, Sharpton, he said, that guy was all over me wanting to get a piece of the Michael Jackson tour. He said, now Norby Walters, who was the white promoter for that tour, was definitely tied in with the mafia and later on became a witness in a trial and all that. And that's documented. But he was a white guy. According to Franzese, Sharpton saw an opportunity that he was going to get a piece of this tour. And Franzese gave me the details of that. And I'd rather than rely on my memory, because this goes back to the early 90s when I did this article, I'd rather just have people look up the article online. But I did call Sharpton. I asked him about this incident. And I quoted him in the article, and he didn't exactly deny it. So extortion in some way to get a cut of the live income from that tour. Yes. And the funny thing about Sharpton, in his later incarnation as a cable television host and et cetera, and a factor in the Democratic Party, I always found him brilliant, articulate, very funny, somebody I would definitely like to have a beer with. But there are just things in his background that I felt should have disqualified him from being a political player. That and the Tawana Brawley case. Yeah. I don't know if you remember that. That was a woman who falsely accused a police officer of abducting and raping her. Her story was thoroughly discredited. And Sharpton was pushing that story and putting out the guy's name. This was at a time period before there was such a thing as doxing. The cop's name, as I recall, was Stephen Pagonis. And he never to this day has apologized for that. And you'd hear these, you'd see these stories on MSNBC about false accusations. And I thought, well, you got somebody who's one of your TV hosts who's guilty of that same thing. These sorts of things really do bother me. I could go on a bit more about things that bother me that have to do with censorship.
I asked you a question offline. It was, are you obsessed with justice? And I mean, your history shows it, and you're obviously extremely good at it.
The reason I'm living in Mexico is because of that, because I got an innocent guy out of prison in Texas with DNA. Some senile judge in Waco hit me with a subpoena for my testimony in a civil case that really had nothing to do with me, because I was working on another case of a wrongly incarcerated man, and I was trying to do DNA testing for him. And they wanted to compel me to reveal under oath where the biological evidence was so they could destroy it. So I came to Mexico because they had no jurisdiction here, and I did not want to be served with this subpoena. First, I was hiding out in the house of my colleague Lawrence Wright of The New Yorker. I was a staff writer at The New Yorker when Larry was. Larry went on to win the Pulitzer for The Looming Tower. It's an amazing book. And then I went from Austin to San Miguel de Allende, which is where I live. And I ended up moving here and living here, and married a Mexican woman, and I love my life here. But I came originally just so that I couldn't be served with this subpoena because they had no jurisdiction here. And if I had been served and I didn't show up for the depot, there would have been an arrest warrant for me. I wanted to avoid that. But the thing is that I'm very much interested in justice. And it does bother me when I hear talk about banned books on MSNBC, for example, that they don't mention the fact that there's also banning going on from the left. Jeanette Walls wrote this book, American Dirt, about a Mexican migrant worker. I actually haven't read it yet. I'm told it's quite good, but that isn't the point. The point is she had to cancel her book tour because she started getting threats because she's not Mexican. Well, I'm not yet. I'm applying for dual citizenship, and I'm pretty sure I'll get it. I've lived here a long time. But that's neither here nor there. Bertolt Brecht had never been to Chicago, but he still wrote St. Joan of the Stockyards. He's perfectly entitled to. You're a creative artist. You can write about anything you want. You don't like it, don't read it. Yeah. Right? Today, William Styron would not be able to publish the Confessions of Nat Turner. I'm quite sure of that. I mean, maybe some independent press would have put it out. And that's one of the greatest novels of the last century. So if we want to talk about censorship, let's be fair about the topic and look at where it's coming from. It's coming from both sides.
Absolutely. I'd like to touch on a couple of other topics of your writings. We'll say back in the Vanity Fair and the New Yorker years was the article on the Chinese gang that turned into a movie with Martin Scorsese.
A very bad movie.
Yeah, but
sorry to say. Scorsese did not direct the movie. He exec produced it, or he was one of the producers. And in my view, it was out of a sense of obligation because Andrew Lau, who was putatively the director, and I say putatively because he didn't speak English and the movie was largely in English, but he had directed, I think written and directed, a terrific Hong Kong film that was the basis of Martin Scorsese's The Departed. And The Departed was the first time that Scorsese won an Oscar, finally.
Okay.
I mean, it's astounding that he didn't win it for Taxi Driver or Goodfellas. But then again, Bernard Herrmann, who wrote his first score was Citizen Kane and his last was Taxi Driver, he won exactly one Oscar for The Devil and Daniel Webster, I think is the better known title. It went by both titles.
And Spielberg, he didn't win until Schindler's List or something?
Well, yeah, but at least he won. Hitchcock never won for Best Director. Stanley Kubrick never won for Best Director. But, you know, if we could do a whole program just on bad Academy Award calls.
I mean, the Grammy Awards alone is just a best friends club. It's not, it's a tangled mess, but it.
All right. But I mean, for the Oscar for Best Song to go to the karaoke and Night and Day loses. I mean, you know, Best Picture, How Green Was My Valley, Citizen Kane loses. I mean, it's just, they just tend to get it wrong, don't they?
But you uncovered something in that article about how the Chinese mob is tied to everything there. Can you talk about that a little?
Well, the article that was turned into the movie was called Revenge of the Green Dragons, and it was about a youth gang in Queens, New York, and their DiLeo, their big brother, who was in the drug business, was almost killed in a hit and left and went back to Shenzhen in China, and leaving as the DiLeo a 20-year-old. It became like Lord of the Flies. I mean, this was an organized gang with a hierarchy, and their businesses were extortion and other things. But mainly it was they would go to Chinese restaurants and establishments and demand money from them or else. You know, and the story opens up with one restaurant that wouldn't pay them, and they came in and they shot and killed the owner, and in the process they shot and killed a customer who was white. This greatly upset the DiLeo, not because they were all innocent who were shot, but that an innocent white guy had been hit, but he thought that's going to bring more heat on us than killing a Chinese guy. Anyway, that story was very cinematic because it was like Lord of the Flies meets Romeo and Juliet, because at the heart of it was a love story between an upwardly mobile, actually Vietnamese Chinese, Viet Chinh as they call it, not a term I made up. Living in the Boston area later on, but in Queens at that time, or New York at that time, very bright, very successful at a young age, but he had the bad fortune to fall in love with a gang girl, a member of the Green Dragons gang, and the two of them were abducted and shot and killed. So when the article came out, there was immediate film interest from a lot of people. One of them was Oliver Stone, who I flatly turned down, not being much of a fan, but at any rate. Then some years later, after I'd moved to Mexico, I got a call from a producer. He gave me a good line of self-promotion, and I said, well, if you're really serious about this, come to San Miguel. Let's spend a couple of days together and we'll talk about it. And he won my trust, and I gave him the rights, and nothing really good happened after that. So I've actually never seen the movie all the way through. I gave up on it. I did not go to the premiere.
I mean, back to the Hitmen, what changed after you wrote the book? Like any perspective that you had, or something that you didn't, that was just shocking that you kind of find out after the book is written? And why is there not a movie? Why did you not make a movie on the Hitmen?
Well, regarding why didn't I make a movie, I've written a TV pilot script, and I'm being represented by Jeff Frasco at CAA, and there's been a fair amount of interest in it. But part of my problem there was that, getting back to Scorsese, who I think is a genius, one of his misfires was the TV series Vinyl, which is set in the same period as Hitmen, and had tremendously talented people involved with it. Terrence Winter, who wrote Wolf of Wall Street, Scorsese as a director, Bobby Cannavale as a great actor, Mick Jagger was a producer. But the show didn't succeed, and ultimately, I believe it's because they took the opposite tack of Hitmen. Hitmen is a David versus Goliath story. It's about an underdog. I mean, Dick Asher is not one of the really colorful characters in the book. He pales compared to people like Irving Azoff and Geffen and Morris Levy and Yetnikov and so forth. But he was someone you could root for because he was fighting the good fight. Vinyl is about an independent record label chief named Ricky Finestra, who's a coke addict. Watching a TV series about a coke addict is like living with an addict. I mean, it's exhausting. And what are you rooting for? That he gets clean and sober? When I wrote my pilot script for Hitmen, I wrote it true to the book, immodestly. I think it's a much better series. Frasco is very high on it. He's a terrific agent, and he's trying to get it made. Now, in the meantime, I'm working on some other things, but I would love to see a TV series based on Hitmen, especially if they could use my pilot script.
Absolutely. So many films on music they're too safe, I find.
But there was another part to your question, and I forgot.
The first part of it was what sort of surprised or shocked you since writing the book?
Oh, yes, right. Okay. So after the book came out, and I was on the staff of The New Yorker, I was writing a profile of Jerry Shargell, who was a criminal defense attorney in New York, who handled a lot of mafia cases. And one of the people I interviewed, who was then in private practice, was a former prosecutor in the Manhattan DA's office named Eliot Spitzer.
Oh, yes.
And Eliot and I are sitting at an outdoor restaurant table. He sits down. First thing he said was, I read Hitmen and I found it very absorbing. And I want to ask you, is this kind of stuff still going on? And this is a couple of years after the book's published. And I said, I think you can take that to the bank that it's still going on. Well, next thing you know, he becomes New York State Attorney General, and he brings a case for which he got, fines and a consent decree on the reemergence of Payola scheme. Then he becomes governor, and things didn't go so well for him after that.
So a book you wrote now turned into somebody turning the law around and actually shutting down Payola from a book you wrote.
Yeah, I would say that I think it was pretty clear to me that I put the idea in his head that as Attorney General, he should investigate this. Yeah.
No kidding. I always say songwriters, you think you're just writing a song, and then you see how that changes society or people or someone's lives. You think you're just writing a book. You think you're just trying to cover a topic, and we don't see the scope of it sometimes in the midst of it. And that's brilliant. The fact that today I still believe it's going on. No, I know it's going on in different fashions. So you've got playlists, you've got editorial playlists, you've got record companies who are shareholders in the company that has the editorial playlists.
Oh, yeah. Well, Alan Freed was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, even though he put his name on Chuck Berry's Maybelline, which he didn't write. But, nice customs curtsy to great kings, as Shakespeare said. I think songwriting is one of the greatest art forms in human history. I really
agree.
do. And I admire people who can do it.
We shared an interest in cultural loss in music. We started discussing songs like Strange Fruit and Born in the USA. And it's like the way that music used to shift society. Now you could be locked up for expressing your thoughts about a political figure now.
It's very true.
Music used to run away with it. I mean, you think about it, Fight the Power, Redemption Song, Smells Like Teen Spirit, Respect, Aretha Franklin. Like, where are those moments and those songs? I mean, obviously the internet has played and social media has played, everything has shifted now. But I have this argument where if we're still fighting to get paid properly and control our rights and our rates, and, when 3 judges can control our mechanical royalties and most of our money, it's a sad state. And to me, it says, well, if music is so valuable and it's changing society, and it changed lynching and it changed wars and then the impact on the financial impact on Nashville alone. So there's all these arguments saying, no, music's very valuable. Record companies are making record profits. I mean, Spotify's stock is 700 plus right now. But then you go talk to the songwriters and the artists and musicians, go, so how's everybody doing? You're the creators of all this. So if it's so valuable, show me the value. Because you're seeing it everywhere else. I definitely want to talk about that story more going forward.
It's a great topic. And there have been throughout history songs that had tremendous societal impact. I mean, look at Battle Hymn of the Republic, for example. That was the song John Brown's Body, but what's her name? The poetess Ward wrote the lyrics for the Battle Hymn of the Republic, and it became the song of the Union fighting against the South and against slavery. And the other thing is that like getting back to what this may be outside the scope of this, but getting back to songwriting as an art form in itself. Just the other night at a local piano bar here in San Miguel, I told you I trained as a pianist.
Yes.
I was accompanying a singer in Golden Slumbers by Paul McCartney. And as I'm playing it, I'm thinking of something that Arnold Schoenberg, the father of the 12-tone system, once said. He said, there's still great music to be written in C major. And I'm playing this thinking, here's an example. I mean, there is a real greatness to this writing. A song can even be 2-3 minutes long and tell an entire story, or be, a really great self-contained piece of work of art. I mean, Schubert's Earl King is like an opera in 4 minutes. Maybe the greatest song ever written.
I mean, we spoke about Amazing Grace, and you've got, a white author.
Amazing Grace is another song. Clearly, the melody was written by an enslaved person on this slave ship, because it's a pentatonic melody, and virtually all spirituals are pentatonic. I'm not by any means the first person to make that observation.
Well, how about you tell us what's going on in Mexico these days? And
we have a Jewish woman president here, Claudia Sheinbaum, and I'm very pleased with that fact. I think of myself as I love my country, which is the United States. I'm a patriot. I'm not living here because I don't want to live in the United States. I'm living here because, for the reasons that I told you earlier, I moved here and I married a Mexican woman, and I'm enchanted with the city of San Miguel de Allende.
Do you want to tell us about the San Miguel Playhouse?
My wife and I, her name is Marcela Brando, we founded the only, to my knowledge, and to ChatGPT's knowledge, for what that's worth, the only English-Spanish bilingual theater company in all Latin America.
Oh, no kidding.
And the very first thing that we did, our company is called La Troupe Mexico. We generally present plays in Spanish with English supertitles. Now, San Miguel is a city in central Mexico with a very large English-speaking population. There are a lot of mostly retired Americans, Canadians here. You can walk around the streets here some days and hear much more English than Spanish. That's not unusual. My wife has been a theater professional and an actor and a director. I mean, she started acting professionally when she was 5 or 6. She comes from a very prominent family of actors and directors. I'm a theater nut. I came to realize pretty early that we had 2 separate theater communities here, one English-speaking, one Spanish-speaking. So we said, well, we have to combine them. The first thing we did was Eugene O'Neill's Long Day's Journey into Night in Spanish with English supertitles, Largo Viaje hacia la Noche. And people said we were nuts. 3 hours of Eugene O'Neill in Spanish with English supertitles. And I have people saying, I'm not going to sit in the audience and read super titles for 3 hours. And when I persuaded the one person in particular to come, he walked out and he said, that was astounding. And I said, well, what about the super titles? He said, well, after about a minute, I forgot I was reading them. I said, well, that's the point. You get caught up in the drama. So we had a playhouse in one part of town. The building was put up for sale. We own the interior. And so Marcella is the president of the board of San Miguel Playhouse. We're also a 501c3 in the United States. And we're moving to a new building. We're leasing the building, but on a long-term lease with really great owners who want us to succeed. We're in the fundraising stage. If anybody listening to this is a lover of theater and wants to help us out, either with business acumen or with contribution, please get in touch with me through Terry. Or actually, you can find me easily. I'm the only Fredric Dannen on Facebook and LinkedIn. And my website is leadgraph, ledegraf.com. So you can find me pretty easily.
Thank you so much. And is there anything else as a journalist that you're working on that you want to kind of sign off on? Let us know what, anything else that you're working on?
Yeah, I have been writing. I have been writing for Billboard. I've actually even written some pieces on classical music. I did a big profile of Jim Dolan, the head of Madison Square Garden, and I interviewed him 3 times, which was unusual because he doesn't give a lot of interviews. And I'm kind of proud of that story. At the moment, I'm working on another big article for Billboard. I also was recently, I don't want to say hired because I don't have a contract yet, but I've been engaged to write a miniseries set in 19th century Mexico. That's going to be a co-production of Televisa, which is the biggest media company in Mexico, and BBC. It's going to be sort of like a Mexican Wolf Hall, and I'm very excited about it.
Well, that's all exciting. I'd love to get down there one of these days. I'd like to get to, I would love to come and visit you in Mexico City as well, in your beautiful city. I just, again...
And I'll take you to Johnny's Piano Bar, and we'll do some of your songs.
Yeah. Well, 3 chords and some lies. Oh, truth. I meant truth. Sorry.
No, 3 chords and the truth. Come on, Terry.
Well, I really appreciate the time.
I can tell you're a truth teller from this hour of conversation.
Well, I'm telling you, you help me because when you're new to interviewing and new to podcasting, it's it can be a little intimidating to go in and interview a investigative journalist who's brought down the mafia and the Payola in ways. So it's been a real eye-opening experience for me, and I really appreciate it. And yeah, thank you so much for taking the time.
It's been great fun. And you asked very good questions.
Oh, thank you, sir.
If today's episode lit a fire in you, don't let it fade. Subscribe to Sold for a Song, leave a review, and be the spark that helps others discover their own worth. And if you're ready to go deeper, my upcoming book and Artist Accelerator course are all waiting for you inside my private portal. Visit TerrenceSawchuk.com. Let's build this movement together.